Working Cows Podcast, episode 139.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, here with another episode for you guys, powered by the Global Ag Network. Very excited to be joined today by Allan Crockett. Allan is an instructor with the Ranching for Profit School, and he is a guy that a lot of people have reached out to me and said, you got to get him on the show, all the way back on episode 2 of the Working Cows Podcast. He was mentioned by Dallas Mount as a guest or as somebody who has been an influence on him, and since that time, of course, Dallas has gone on to take over Ranch Management Consultants and the Ranching for Profit School, and so I have tried to get Allan on, and then had some scheduling issues on my end, and so have been receiving flack from people who have been at different events with Allan, saying, "I can't believe you stood him up." So I'm coming around. I finally got it done, and we're here with Allan Crockett today, and I'm excited to talk to him about managing people problems. So, Allan, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
You're welcome. Glad to be here, Clay.
I've talked to quite a few people about you and your influence on their life, different folks that I know, and Dallas Mountain. I've heard a lot of people quote you as saying that everything on your ranch is a people problem. Is that a fair recitation of the quote that you're maybe a little bit famous for?
Well, I think the way I've said it is every problem's a people problem, period. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if it's on a ranch or in business in town or politics or anything else. It really all comes back to people.
And what are you thinking about when you're teaching a class? You are an instructor for Ranching for Profit. What are you thinking about when you're teaching a class as some of the tools that you give people to help them overcome the people problems that they're facing?
Well, let me answer that maybe in a bit of a roundabout way. But let's say the ranch isn't making money. Economically, it's not viable, or financially, it doesn't cash flow, or some of those kinds of things. If that's the case, we've got a people problem. We tend to think, well, we have a money problem, or we have a market problem, price problem, or a weather problem, or government policy problem, or whatever it is. But really, it's us as ranchers that we don't either understand how to solve that problem, or we don't have the knowledge, or maybe we have the knowledge, but we want to bury our head in the sand to let things go on and hope that, it just gets better on its own, those kinds of things. So it really comes back to people, and people have to take ownership for everything that happens to them. 100% ownership for everything that happens in life, whether that's relationship with a spouse or with kids or with parents, siblings, relationships with bankers, relationships with range cons or agency people, our financial situation, or you look at your bank account and take 100% ownership for what's there. And if it's not where you want it to be, then you got to take responsibility and fix that. So, in other words, you have the perfect system in place to give you the results you're getting. And if you don't like the results, you got to change the system. And it all comes back to people and getting people to take ownership and responsibility for not only their actions, but also for the results that they're getting or not getting.
And do you think that is facilitated through communication, through intentional communication, maybe ranch-wide management meetings on a regular basis, or what are some of the ways that people start to foster that extreme level of ownership?
Well, it has to start with either the manager or the owner or whoever is responsible in the first place. It has to start there, and then it has to work down through employees and that kind of thing. And that has to happen through, like you're saying, through some meetings and some shared goals, shared vision, getting people on the same page and making sure we even have a page for people to be on. Because if we don't know where we're going, it doesn't matter which fork in the road we take, because we just don't know. It's going to take us someplace, and we don't know where that place is. But if we have a defined goal and we really know what we want, and we know what we want our business to become, we know what we want the ranch to become, we know what we want our relationships to become, and our financial picture and economic stability and those kinds of things, then we have to take complete ownership for that. And that has to start with the man or the woman on top, whether that's an owner or a manager or whoever, but it has to start there, and then that has to trickle down, and people have to get on board with that kind of philosophy of taking extreme ownership, 100% for the results that they're supposed to be producing.
So is this an idea of managers and owners and whoever's responsible for kind of setting that culture, owning up to mistakes and being open and honest and transparent with the people that are working under them? Is there more to it than that? Are there other things that you're thinking about in that regard of the kind of trickle down of this culture?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And part of it is just a total buy-in from everybody that's involved in the business that yeah, we are committed and we're dedicated, and this is the direction we want this business to go. And we're going to make sure we do our part to make that happen. And if we don't have buy-in from upper management or lower management or employees at any level, then we end up with chaos. And if we have chaos, then we're not going to be successful in what we're doing.
Are there some common mistakes people make that result in not having buy-in, kind of organization or operation-wide buy-in?
Yeah, if you stop to think about that for just a minute, if I own a ranch and I have employees working for them and they don't have buy-in to what we're trying to accomplish there, then what ends up happening is they don't take full responsibility for the results that they need to produce. They might even not consciously but subconsciously even undermine some of the other efforts that we're trying to accomplish, just because they don't have that buy-in or they don't share that vision or that commitment to that vision. So there can be some real undermining things that can happen. It can happen with partners. If a father, son, or two brothers are involved, or brother, sister involved in a partnership, if one of them doesn't have complete buy-in into the direction the business needs to go and that kind of thing, the subconscious mind is so strong that sometimes we do things just to self-sabotage. For example, there's the old paradigm thinking that there's no money in ranching and ranchers are not supposed to be rich and shouldn't have money and that kind of thing. And I've seen that with people when they start becoming profitable, they self-sabotage and do things that subconsciously, I believe, but they do things so that they don't become profitable. And that's a mindset thing that has to be worked through, helping people see that and understand the reasoning behind some of the mistakes they do or some of the things they don't do that inhibit their profitability.
But Allan, this individual and I happen to share the same last name. Are there any tips that you have as far as of organizing a ranch business in such a way so that you can kind of leverage the necessity of everybody having buy-in? You need to have buy-in or we need to part ways. How do you organize the ranch in such a way that that's a possibility?
Yeah, it has to start with, let's create a shared vision. Okay, where do we want the ranch to be long-term, 10, 15 years? But I break that down. Okay, where do we want the ranch to be 3 years from now? And there's been quite a bit of scientific study on that even saying that let's set a 5-year goal. 5 years is just too far out there. It gives us just too much time that there's not urgency to it. So if we look at a 3-year goal of where we want our business to be in 3 years, and we can look at that, again, relationship-wise, we can look at that ecologically, we can look at it economically, we can look at it cash flow and profitability, we can look at it from cow genetics. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can look at that. But I like to take a 3-year goal and then break that goal down and say, okay, if this is where I want to be 3 years from now, so April 2023. This is where I want to be. Okay, where do I need to be in April 2022? So what does it have to look like at the 2-year mark so that I'm on track to be there in 3 years, and then break that down. Okay, if I'm going to be there in April 2022, where do I need to be in April 2021? Now that I've broke that down, I can look at April 2021 and say, okay, from here, I can break down what needs to happen in the next 12 months and get that organized and put it on a timeline. There's certain things that have to be done first and other things later, and some of it, 12 months from now. But we can break down the next 12 months of here's the actions and the results that we need to produce in the next 12 months to get us on track, so that in 2021, in April 2021, we're right where we need to be, so that we can now take April 2022 and break that down into the next 12 months and work through that. We get to that milestone, and now we can look at April 2023 and say, okay, here's where we want to be. And we can break that down into the next 12 months. And then as we approach that time frame, then we say, okay, we're about there. Let's set a new 3-year goal that, again, takes us closer to where we want to be in 10, 15 years from now. And I'm using April because that's when we're talking. It's April. Right. I mean, it could be January or whatever month you're having this discussion. But break that down so it's very, very strategically planned by year, and then take the first year and strategically plan that by month. And then now everybody sees that on the team. Everybody on the team sees that. And if we don't have buy-in, then we need to go back and say, okay, what's keeping that from happening? What are the concerns? What are the reservations? What in your mind is not allowing you to see this or be committed to it or whatever? And quite frankly, there's times when we just have the wrong people on the team and we need to part ways. I don't jump to that conclusion right away typically, but sometimes that has to happen because we just don't have the right people on the team. Sometimes we don't have them in the right places, the right seat in the bus, as we like to say sometimes. But sometimes we don't have the right people on the bus, and they just need to leave and go get on a different bus that fits them better, and they're happier and we're happier. And we move forward and we get the right people on the bus and get them in the right seat on the bus, and then we can accomplish the things we're trying to accomplish. But it really starts with, that shared vision of where we want this thing to be down the road and what we want it to look like.
And would you say that these 3-year goals that we're setting, we can't fix everything that needs fixing in a 3-year period? We're going to have to find where we want to start and work on that thing in this 3-year period, and then the next 3-year period, maybe we can move on to a different area of the ranch.
Yeah, let's just say, for example, let's say we're losing a couple of $100,000 a year, and we've done that historically. We subsidize the business with off ranch income or inherited wealth, or we work for free or whatever. We have other investments that we bring money out of them and we put it into the business and try to keep it afloat. All right. So if that's a starting point, which it could be and has been for a lot of people. So if that's a starting point, then, 3 years from now, we might want to say, okay, let's be breaking even 3 years from now, or let's have a $50,000 profit 3 years from now. And when we get to that point, then we might be looking at it and say, okay, now 3 years from now, we want to be at a $250,000 a year profit. And let's work on that. So that could be a process that, down the road, maybe we want to have a $500,000 annual profit. But that may not be real likely that we can get that done in the first 3 years. It might be, but it might not be. Sometimes it's just, we've done things a certain way for so long that we just need to completely revamp a business and not do things the way we've been doing them. And if something's not working, sometimes we just need to stop doing that altogether. And that right there, many times will create a profit where we've had a loss in the past.
How do you go about facilitating change on a ranch in a family business where things have been done a certain way for a long time? What are some of the ways that you do it? Is it simple economic analysis? Show them the numbers. This is not working. We need to make a change. Or are there some other tools that you bring into a conversation like that?
Yeah, an economic analysis of the business is a really, really neat place to start, because with that analysis, and if we do the analysis right, then we can look at that, and then we're just looking at the facts. And here's the facts, and here's what the facts are telling us. We're feeding this much hay, or we're doing this, or we're doing that, and this is what it's costing us. And if we eliminated that or changed this would be a projected difference in where we are today and what it would be a year from now or 2 years from now. And when you look at that, and I like to use flip charts and hang them on the wall, whether it's in somebody's office or their family room or kitchen or wherever, because when you get it up on the wall and you start looking at it, it looks back at you and it stares at you, and you can't deny it. When we look at the facts, they are the facts. And so that as we look at that, it's that's a good place to start, just economically, especially if a rancher has 2 or 3 different enterprises. Maybe they have a cow calf enterprise, and they also have a stalker enterprise. Maybe they have a horse enterprise or a sheep enterprise or whatever. You break those enterprises out and say, okay, this is what this enterprise is doing, this is what this one's doing, and this is what the third one's doing. And sometimes you look at that and say, goodness gracious, this one's losing money and this one's making money. And if we don't know what we don't know. And so until we lay it out there and put it in black and white, like I say, I like to use flip charts and hang it on the wall so we can look at it. And when you see that, it is amazing that even older generations, I guess we could call them that, the dad or the granddad looks at that, and when he sees it, he will come to the conclusion, we have to change this, or we have to change that, or we can't do this like that anymore if we expect to be profitable. And so laying the facts out is a really good place to start, and then face the brutal facts of our current reality. I mean, here's where we are, and here's the brutal facts of it, and now what are we going to do to change that? And that's where that clear vision, that shared vision comes into place. Well, if this is where we are today, and this is where we want to be down the road, we got to make some changes. And how do we make those changes? But to me, it really starts with why. We got to get really clear on why. Too many people, we get hung up on the how. I'd like to make $1 million. I don't know how to do that. I'd like to be a millionaire. Well, who wouldn't? But why do you want to be a millionaire? Let's break that down. If you made $1 million profit, or a $500,000 profit, or $250,000, I mean, you pick the number. If you made that kind of profit, why do you want to make that? What are you going to do with that money? What's that going to be used for? And as we get clear on those kinds of things, Simon Sinek wrote a really good book, Start With Why, that I think is an excellent read. That we need to start with why we're doing what we're doing in the first place, and why do we want some of these things down the road. But it starts there. I mean, we could start with ecology, and we go out and look at grass and say, okay, well, how much bare ground do we have on this place? And as we look at grass, well, how much of this grass is underutilized? How much of it's overgrazed? And start looking at that and seeing that. I was on a ranch one time with a client, and stopped and looked at grass, and I pointed that out to him, and he'd been there his whole life, never seen it. Never saw stuff that was grazed all the way to the ground and stuff that hadn't been grazed at all. Which is a pretty sure sign of low stock density and continuous grazing. Mm-hmm. At least continuous grazing through the growing season. And when he saw it, he was appalled. I mean, he just couldn't believe it. He said, I've never seen this. I've been here my whole life, never seen it. And he said, we got to stop this. Well, all right, you start seeing some of those kinds of things, and they're pointed out to you. Then you say, okay, now what happens if I stop that? If I stop the overgrazing and the underutilization or the overrest, well, if I can stop that, then I can grow more grass. If I grow more grass, what can I do? Well, then I can run more animals. If I run more animals and my animals are profitable, then I make more profit.
Yep.
Well, what am I going to do with the profit? So it still comes back to people, and people being able to see and understand and having the intestinal fortitude to make the changes that need to be made. And sometimes they're not easy changes to make, because we, in ranching, we get really stuck in tradition, as a whole across the nation and individual ranches, because, we're third generation or fourth generation on the place. And we get stuck in tradition, and not to destroy what our fathers and grandfathers did, let's build on what they did and take it to a new level.
Yeah, and Adam Courtney here posts from Beef Magazine. After evaluating 90 years of census data, the report concludes that there will be no operators younger than 35 by 2033, and the average age of the rancher will be 60 years old by 2050. And his question is, or could you just share some of your thoughts about the generation gap in ranching? What are you thinking are some of the contributing factors to why that exists?
One of them is we're not profitable, and because we're not profitable, I mean, who wants to come back and not make money? Yeah, and I see it a lot. Kids grow up on the ranch, and that's all they want to do, and they go off to college and realize that there's more to the world than the ranch, and people are making money that they never made. Maybe they ran 2 or 3 cows or half a dozen cows or something like that. And with that, they got to put fuel in their pickup and pay for their school clothes and put it away for college and really never had anything. So I think profitability is a big piece of it. But I think another big piece of it is it's not fun. And too many times when we work cattle and Dad yells at us all the time when we're working cattle, what do you want to go home to that for? It's not fun. And we start at daylight or before, and we work till dark or after, and there's no time to do personal hobbies and some of the other things that we might enjoy doing and have a life outside of ranching. And so who wants to come back to that? And I think those two things are the biggest things that we're facing in agriculture, and specifically ranching, is we're not profitable and it's not fun. And my experience has been when we start making money, all of a sudden it gets to be a lot more fun. Now, you mentioned Adam Courtney, and I was just visiting with his dad a little while ago, and Tom was telling me, he says, we started calving, and Adam had made the comment that that's the first time he'd been on a tractor in a barn all winter.
Wow.
And he was just in there for just spreading out some gravels, kind of smoothing out some work they'd done in there. And he says, we spent all winter on a tractor in the barn, cleaning it out and calving cows and that kind of thing. We're not doing that. And how much funner that is today to be involved in something like that than, being up all night calving cows for 3 months out of the winter and spring. So
we see a lot of people make a shift in their business to a less year-round, or we see a lot of people go to a more of a seasonal grazing type thing when they're talking about trying to free up some time. Is there a lot of barriers between profitability and a cow-calf operation? Or I guess I wonder, are we going to see less and less people running these year-round herds, or is it something that people can do in a profitable way if given the right decision-making tools?
I think given the right decision-making tools, a cow-calf enterprise can be very profitable. Part of the things that we see is feeding hay takes a lot of time and money and energy. And if we're putting up our own hay, I mean, if we put up hay all summer and then feed it all winter, really we're hay farmers, we're not cattle ranchers.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is, okay, how can we get that out? Well, we can't calve in your part of the world, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, the places that have snow. We can't calve in February and March when there's snow on the ground and think that we're not going to have to feed hay, because if our grass is all covered up and we can't get to it, then we have to feed hay if we're going to calve at that time of year. So what we've seen a lot of people do is made a shift in the calving. Some calving April, May, some May, June. And because of that, then they're not having to feed near as much hay. Some of them completely taking hay 100% out of their operation, and they're still running cows year round. But they're stockpiling forage, and cows can graze through some snow as long as it's not frozen over and crusted and iced and that kind of thing. Ice is a lot harder to deal with than snow is to deal with.
Yeah, I asked Jim Garish one time, and he said, I've found that the winters in Idaho are much more easy to deal with than the winters in Missouri, which was kind of surprising to me. But he said, just for that reason, the ice becomes a real difficult thing to get around or get past.
Yeah. And so, well, talking to a client in North Dakota last winter, I guess it was, and they had lots of ice, and he said, my cows have grazed through snow for years, but this ice thing, I got to take a tractor out there and just break ice up to another bale where they can get to. They won't move, they won't walk. It cuts them, and it's terrible. So again, I think the decisions that come along with that are, those are people decisions and people problems, that we have to own up to that and say, okay, what enterprise is best for the environment that we choose to ranch in. And if we choose to live in South Dakota or Montana or North Dakota or, wherever, Arizona or Texas, I don't care where, that's a choice, and we have to recognize that is a choice. And if we choose to live in that environment that has a lot of snow in the wintertime, okay, well, then maybe we need to choose to not be calving in February and March. Maybe we should be calving in April and May, or maybe it should be May and June. And those kinds of decisions, that comes back to people and taking ownership, complete ownership, that we're going to run this business and we're going to run it this way. And these cows are going to work for me. I'm not going to work for the cows. And when we put up hay all summer and we feed it all winter, we're working for our cows. They're not working for us. And the more of that we do, the less profitable we are, because of the equipment and man hours and fuel and everything else that comes into that we spend money on. Lots of times is not necessary, and lots of times ought to be done away with.
Yep, and like you're saying, it's not just and this is a quote from Dave Pratt, but he's, it's not just the cost of the inputs, it's the cost of the inputting.
Yes, absolutely. I
got another great question here. Sage asks, how do you take people from being your biggest problem, the scarcity mindset, to being your biggest asset, the abundance mindset?
Yeah, it's interesting. The scarcity mindset, I like to draw a ladder on a flip chart. And I start at the bottom of the ladder and say, this is death. And you move up a rung or two on the ladder, and there's anger, and there's blame, and there's hatred, and those kinds of feelings that we have. And right there toward the bottom of the ladder is a scarcity mindset. And then I jump up to the top of the ladder and say, okay, at the top of the ladder, we have joy and love and happiness and fulfillment, responsibility. And there's also an abundance mindset when we're at the top of the ladder. And then there's all kinds of places we get to on that ladder. And, obviously when we die, we're done. But as far as ranching is concerned, but we can slide up and down that ladder, or slip off the top rung and be down close to the bottom and catch ourselves and pull ourselves back up. But again, that's taking ownership. So after I write that out, at the top of that ladder, I like to write the word ownership, and at the bottom of the ladder, the word victim. And when we have a scarcity mindset, really we have a victim mindset, a victim mentality, that there's not enough around. There's not enough. If I get what I want, you can't have what you want. And so we have to get out of that there is enough to go around, and you can have what you want, and I can have what I want, and there's still plenty for the next person to have what they want. So part of that in getting people to see that abundance mentality and abundance mindset is sometimes we have to, for example, let's look at grass, and back to the ecology thing, and overgrazing and overresting grass versus, good quality grazing where we're growing more grass and we're stopping those other negative things from happening. And as we do that, we build soil and soil fertility. And as we do that, then we grow more grass, and it just snowballs on us that, we start doing things right, and things just get better and better and better. Whereas we do things wrong, they get worse and worse and worse. And from soil to grass and our pocketbook. And so sometimes we have to take people that say, well, we've always done it this way, and we've always set stock, and this is how we've done it. You have to take them someplace close by, and there's more and more places close by, just about any place we ranch anymore. But take them to somebody that's actually doing some good things and they've gone from running 500 cows to running 750 cows or 1,000 cows on the same acres of land by stopping the overgrazing and stopping the overrest and building soil and those kinds of things, and let people see that yes, this can be done, and we can do it too. Again, if people get stuck in that scarcity mindset and we can't get them out of that, through working with them and teaching them and trying to educate them and that kind of thing, then maybe they shouldn't be part of our team.
And I opened this up, as I said, I think I said that to my private Facebook group for some people to submit questions. Every one of these questions has to do in some way with the next generation, whether it's the next generation starting from zero or passing it on to the next generation, or managing the tension of one generation coming up and another generation transitioning out, and then this generation being caught in the middle. I guess where I want to go again, another question from Sage here is, when a person's getting started out in ranching, and I'll just say from zero, without any inheritance, without a parent involved, what should they avoid doing, and what are some of the big steps that they should do when they're trying to get started out?
That's a great question. I think part of that is look for win-win situations. And I think there's a lot of them out there, but win-win, if you and I are looking at trying to do something together and it's a win for me and a lose for you, I don't want to be part of that. If it's a win for you and a lose for me, I don't want to be part of that either. It really needs to be a win-win. And so looking at that, how can I win and how can you win? And let's just say you're the landowner, you own the ranch and you don't have any heirs that want to come back or whatever, and I'm the young 30-year-old rancher looking for an opportunity. I believe that there are lots of ways we can meld those two people together, young people with older people that don't have the same last name and don't have the same blood running through their veins. And I think we do that by starting out, the young person leases the ranch, maybe leases the cows or custom graze or does it on a share. It has to be big enough to scale that the young person can make some money and put some money aside to start buying cows or buy more of them, or eventually buy some of the land, or set it up so the young person can lease the ranch from the heirs, your heirs. If they're not going to come back to the ranch, that can be set up so that they get a lease payment, and after you're gone, they get it. But I get to keep leasing the ranch and building that. I think part of the problem in ranching is, well, I don't think I know it is we have so much money tied up in land that it's hard to make a return on that. And really, if you look at land, ranch land, how do you make a return on it? Well, you either lease it or you sell it. If you're going to lease it, you can lease it to your livestock company or an operating company, or you can lease it to a neighbor or to a young person or something. But that's to me, it's no different than if you said, okay, I want to own an apartment complex. There's two ways to make money there. You lease it out, rent out the apartments, or you sell it. Down the road, you fix it up or do something and you sell it and get some capital gains out of it. So to me, a ranch is the same thing. We make money in land by either leasing the land or by selling it. Leasing it gives us a very small return, but it gives us cash flow, capital gains, and selling it down the road is where the bigger money would be. So I would be looking at that and say, okay, number one, if I go buy land, if I'm a young person, I go buy land, now my money's tied up in that land. I'm struggling to make a land payment, and I've got money tied up in something that I do not intend to sell. I want to keep this place. This is going to be my ranch. So that creates a big issue. It puts all kinds of constraints on us to be able to make money when we're having to make a big land payment. If we can take that around and say, okay, let's lease land rather than buy it, and let's partner up with somebody, whether that's the landowner or somebody that owns a lot of cattle looking for home for some more cattle, that I can partner with them. Again, I think the big mistake is saying I have to own land to be in the livestock business, to be in have a cow-calf enterprise or a stocker enterprise. Land can be hard to lease, but going back to Adam's comment, the census thing, that the age of ranchers, ranchers getting older and older, and there's fewer and fewer coming back. And again, profitability plays a big part of that, or lack of profitability, and we're not having fun. So let's hook those two people up, and the older person that doesn't have any heirs, that's looking for a retirement. Well, that's great retirement income. You can lease your ranch out. You got retirement income that, at least today, is not subject to Social Security or self-employment tax. It's subject to income tax, but not the other two. So if we can lease that out and have retirement income, and somebody else can have a start, I think there's great opportunity there.
And I know that Shannon Sims, who submitted this next question, has developed a shared vision on his place, because I've heard him talk twice, once live and another time I watched a video of a talk he gave, and they talked about their goal that they had set, and their context. And so I know that he has a shared vision in place, but he asks, how do I provide meaningful work to everyone involved, meaning his parents who are older and his kids who are younger. So meaningful work seems to me to be a function of everybody kind of, like you said earlier, being on the same page and knowing the direction we're going. Is there more to it than that, or is there another piece to that can help foster that sense of meaning among different parts of the team that is managing a ranch?
That's a great question. How do we provide meaningful work? And I think part of that is especially with the older generation that's retiring and transitioning out of the business, is you're asking questions like, what do you want out of this thing in the future? What do you want your role to be? And how much responsibility do you want to have? And I've seen where dad decides, I just want to be a cowboy. You tell me what to do. And I've seen others that, hey, I've built this genetic cow herd. I want to be involved in some of the genetic decisions that we make, and the types of bulls that we're using, and replacements that we're keeping, if we're keeping our own replacement heifers and those kinds of things. So I think it still comes back to open, honest communication and having that dialogue. And I would not expect that dialogue to be a one-time thing. I would anticipate, okay, let's initiate the dialogue and get started. But again, if I'm 75 years old and I'm on my way out, and I want to be involved, that could change from year to year, and it's certainly going to change in 5 years. And even if I was 65 and wanting to transition out, my role at age 65 might be different than it would be at 68 or 70. And that's my choice, that I want to be less involved or I want to remain involved. So I think having those kinds of conversations of, where do you want this thing to go as far as you and your involvement in it and the role you play? And then with the younger generation coming in, I think that might be even a tougher conversation, because if dad's 75 and junior's 50, just grabbing ages and numbers out of the air, and the kid's 20, how do you have that conversation? Is the ranch even big enough to support 3 families and give them the life they want and the lifestyle, the quality of life that they like to enjoy? If the kid is a teenager and still in high school, then you still have to have the conversation. But I think we need to understand that those kinds of conversations, when we're 13, 15, 18 years old, and we're going to go off to college for a couple of years or 4 years, there's a lot of change that happens there. Because if the only world we've ever known is the ranch, and now we know a different world, and maybe we don't want to go back. And I've seen it many times too, where the son goes off and meets this girl, and she comes to the ranch and visits, and it's an hour from the middle of nowhere, and then you're in the middle of nowhere when you get there, and then you still got to get somewhere after that, and it's really cool the first time or two you do that, and all right, let's get married and move to the ranch, and we do that, and then all of a sudden the middle of nowhere is a long, long ways from anywhere. And it was a fun place to come and visit for a weekend or Christmas vacation or something like that. And now we're here full time, and there's not any stores that I like to shop at anywhere close by, and those kinds of things start to happen. And then all of a sudden, the daughter-in-law says, you got a decision to make, because I'm not staying here. Either we go off someplace and do something else, or I do that by myself, or we do it together. And then, the son has to make that decision. And so that age right there, there's lots of potential for things that can change and go wrong. I think more so than the older generation transitioning out. The older generation, we just need to get clear, on what they want and the role they want to play and have in the business. And sometimes it's just go chop ice or check waters, or at branding, I'll come and help at branding, or whatever that is. But on others, they still want to have a finger in the day-to-day operations. But someplace in there, if there's going to be a transition, then the person calling the shots, it has to transition from dad to son, and the clearer we can become on the timing of that, and the roles and how we're going to transition from one role to another, and making sure that the younger person has the training and the capacity to get to where we want them to get to, because sometimes that doesn't happen too often than not.
So when we're talking about our core principles of a ranch, how often should those be updated, or should it be one of those, this is the core principles and they stay the core principles, and if you are going to come and be a part of this ranch, you need to enjoy them? Or is there some flexibility and ability to update those as the business itself changes, given the fact that some people are going to transition out, some people are going to transition in? How much of that, or how much freedom is there in that?
Yeah, when we look at core principles, core principles typically aren't going to change a whole lot. I wouldn't say they're chiseled in stone, and there's some flexibility there. But the thing that I would see would change would be, that long-term vision might change. And again, and I sit down with people and we work out a plan. This is the direction we want to go and how we want to get there. And this is why we're doing this, and et cetera, et cetera. That is, that's a roadmap, and it's a paper roadmap. And we might hit a detour in the roadmap, and somebody could die, somebody gets divorced, somebody becomes disabled. Those kinds of things happened, and all of a sudden, what was once a very clear picture, now that we've had one of those life events, maybe it's not so clear. We need to go back and readdress it. I think people ought to readdress their long-term vision, every 3 to 5 years, and just make sure, are we still headed the direction we all want to go? And is this the way we want things to be? And are we enjoying the quality of life that we want to enjoy, and the lifestyle? And do we have time to do the things off the ranch that we want to do? And do we have money to do those things? Because sometimes we have time, we don't have any money, and other times we have money, we don't have any time. And so to me, we need to meld those two things together. We need to have both time and money to enjoy whatever that is. And whether that's, ranch rodeos, whether it's shooting clay pigeons, whether it's, going kayaking, mountain climbing, flying an airplane, whatever it is that people, other hobbies that they have that aren't tied directly to the ranch, do we have time and money to enjoy those kinds of things? And this vision that we're creating, we're trying to accomplish with our business, so that our business serves us and our cows work for us, or our stockers, whatever it is they have, but those animals work for us rather than us working for them. Is this thing taking us the direction we want to go, or is it, man, we're running ourselves ragged, we're making money, but we don't have time to even stop and think? Then that's not getting us where we want to go either. So, then we need to reevaluate, well, how can we simplify this operation? And I'm really big on that. And my experience has been with the clients that I've worked with is if we can simplify the operation, will make it more profitable almost always.
Hmm.
Simplify the day-to-day stuff that has to be done. Just simplify everything. If we can simplify it, then we have time to do things. And if we're profitable and more profitable, then we have money to do things during the times that we have time to do it with. Again, it comes back to the two things, time and money. So I don't know if I answered Shannon's question or not, but
yeah, no, I think it's good. And I think part of the question there is, do we expand now or do we wait? And I think given the aging demographic of ranchers and the changing of hands, there might be some freedom to wait until you're sure that the next generation wants to be involved before you go ahead and expand, because there's what the expansion opportunity that is there today might not be there in 5 years, but given the aging demographic, there'll probably be different ones.
Yeah, and if I'm in that position where I'm surrounded by a bunch of old ranchers, I'm being proactive about that. I'm being proactive about talking to my neighbors and saying, hey, if you decide you want to lease this place, I'd sure like to know about it. I'm interested. Like to work with you on it or something, and initiating that conversation, not necessarily going to the neighbor and here's a contract I've drawn up, and I'd like you to think about it. I'll be back tomorrow to pick it up, kind of. But just initiating the conversation and being proactive about that, knowing full well that if Junior wants to come back, we need to expand, and maybe we've expanded internally and we've taken some big leaps there that we've increased our carrying capacity, and now things are good, but it's not good enough for two families to live, really, really well. All right, I'd be real proactive about going to my neighbors and talking to them, and just starting the conversation. Now, obviously, if there's a father there and a younger son that's come back, well, that's probably not going to happen there. But if there's a father there, an older guy, and nobody's coming back, or man, I'd be very proactive about that.
And when we're managing employees, in your mind, are incentive programs a good idea? Is it a good idea to give people some skin in the game? Do you have any recommendations on managing those things?
Yes. If we give a bonus just for the sake of giving a bonus, people come to expect it. And then when they don't get the bonus, they get frustrated and disappointed. And I've seen that a lot. When we have unfulfilled expectations, they always lead to disappointment and frustration, and by the person that has the unmet expectation. And so if we're going to give, I know people that give bonuses because it's Christmas, and gave them $1,000 bonus 2 year's ago, so this year's $1,200. Give them a little bit more. Well, next year, it's only $800. Well, in my mind, if you're the one giving me the bonus and it was $1,000 2 years ago and then $1,200, I'm thinking it's probably going to be $1,400, $1,500 this year, and it's only $800. I'm frustrated and disappointed. I was expecting more than that. And so when we give bonuses just for the sake of giving bonuses, it typically will backfire on us. So if I'm going to do incentives, I want the incentives tied to something. And it all comes back to profitability. So whether that's, gross margin per cow or gross margin per acre or number of percentage of live calves, at calving or at weaning, or number of cows bred back, or the gross margin on those cows. But whatever we tie it to, the person that is going to accept responsibility for that has to have control of it to some degree or another. In other words, we can't tell them how to do everything or tell them how to do it and then say, okay, once you get this done and we reach this point, you get a bonus. That doesn't mean you can't give them direction and guidance, but it's the old Dr. Grack acronym. Dr. Grack meaning desired results, the guidelines, the resources available, the accountability and the consequences to the individual and to the business. And if we can spell that out very clearly, and if we get to this point, then this is what the incentive is. This is what it, whether it's a financial incentive or time off incentive or or whatever it happens to be. Typically, it's going to be financial of some sort or another. Well, if we have that spelled out very clearly and it's measurable so that we can look at that and the person that's going to accept that responsibility agrees to it, and we see this is the way we'll measure it, and there's not a lot of gray area. It's pretty much black and white. This is how we're going to measure it. Then I think incentives can be very, very beneficial and can lead to some buy-in. But when they're just arbitrary and random, at the end of the year Christmas bonus kind of thing, I've seen that backfire way too many times.
Any ideas on how to broach the tough subjects when we have to have a tough conversation with somebody? And I'm wondering if maybe this question isn't coming from the perspective of reassuring myself that this conversation needs to happen and weighing the cost versus benefits of having the conversation versus not. And if you have tools that can help people guide them through a process of having a tough conversation, I'd like to hear those.
Yeah, the tough conversations, crucial conversations, is another really good book. But it's one of those things that, are we going to have the conversation, or we're just going to bite our tongues and skirt around it for the rest of our lives, and hope that when Dad dies, everything falls into place for me, or whatever the conversation is that is the tough conversation that we need to be having. To me, let's put a flip chart up there and let's look at the flip chart instead of looking at each other, so that you have that triangle thing. But let's list the problems and the things that we're facing, the situation, whatever it is. Let's list it on the flip chart, and let's attack the problem and not attack people. And whether that's somebody that's not living up to their share of the bargain, they're not fulfilling their responsibility. Again, we can list the facts on a flip chart and just say, okay, now where are we going to go from here, and have that person take ownership of it. The other side of that is succession planning, and that kind of thing is laying it out and those defined roles and having that kind of conversation. We don't want Dad and Mom, or Mom, whichever one's left, feeling like they're being pushed out and kicked out and we're taking over. So part of that is let's have the conversation, and let's, what role do you want to have, and where do you want to be in 5 years, and what do you want to be doing with your time? And too many times, the off the cuff answer is, well, I just want to do what I've always done. The bottom line is you probably can't do that anymore at 70 like you could when you were 35, or 80 or 90. You can't do it like you used to be able to do it. So having those conversations, I think laying it out, and I think if we schedule time for that, and everybody knows this is the conversation we're going to have, and we're going to have it at this day, and we're probably not going to finish it, but we're going to start, and we're going to lay some things out, and then we're going to think about it and come back and have another conversation and work through the process. A lot of these things are processes. They're not just cut and dry overnight, or sit down and 2 or 3 hours we hash this out, and now everybody's happy for the rest of their lives. Sometimes we need to think these things through a little bit. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes you need a facilitator to come in and help through that process. I've facilitated a lot of those kinds of meetings, and sometimes they work out really good with some really good changes that come to people, and sometimes they don't. The ranch I worked with several years ago, family ranch, and 2 and 3 generations involved, and whether the involvement was as a shareholder, stockholder in the company, or actual management, boots on the ground working kind of thing. But they ended up leasing the ranch out, and I think that was the best decision they could have made, because the trust had been taken to a point where it wasn't really going to get rebuilt for a long time, and people didn't trust each other, and lies had been told, and dishonest things had happened with money and with livestock and that kind of thing, that the trust just wasn't there. And so, the family didn't want to sell the place. I mean, they felt, part of their heritage and legacy was there, and to pass on, and what had been passed on to them, they wanted to keep it and grow it. But they lease the ranch out. And sometimes that's the best answer, and sometimes it's not. But I've seen people couldn't come to an accord, and they sold the ranch. And to me, that's not a win either.
Mm-hmm.
We just, all right, forget it. We'll just sell the place, and whatever's left of the money when we're gone, you can fight over it, divide it up, or whatever. But I think sometimes we need professional facilitation to come in and help that, because these can be very sensitive issues and sensitive topics to talk about. And whenever things have a tendency to be sensitive, they also have a tendency to bring emotions to the surface. And when emotions come to the surface, sometimes we say and do things that we normally wouldn't say and do, and then we regret it later. And so sometimes it's, just a good facilitator coming in and helping with that kind of a process can be very, very beneficial to the team and the parties involved there.
So if you've got a generation that doesn't want to come back to the ranch, are there any investments or assets that you've seen people make use of that can make the transfer a little bit more fair, not necessarily equitable, but fair?
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, Clay, because a lot of times we get hung up on, we have 3 kids, we got to give them each a third, and that's not true at all. I mean, that's equal, but that does not necessarily mean fair. And fair and equal are not synonymous terms, and we need to come to grips with that and really get over it. But I've seen people use life insurance policies. I've seen people invest off the ranch in other businesses or have other investments, whether it's real estate, whether it's a stock portfolio of some sort, or those kinds of things that maybe the off-ranch kids get. I think one of the biggest things is separating the land entity from the operating company or the operating entity. Because if we separate that out, and almost always the land is worth a whole lot more than the operating company is. So you could have a $15 million ranch that the operating company is worth $1 million or $2 million or something like that. Well, how do you divide that up? And you say, okay, I'm going to split it between my 5 kids. Well, now you got 5 ranches that run 100 or 150 cows, and there's no scale there. There's no money to be made there. But if we separate the land entity from the operating company, then what can happen is that can be set up where the heirs all own the land entity, and it can be set up so it's not going to be sold. It doesn't have to be sold, or it doesn't get to be sold, or it just won't happen. And that can be set up legally, and then the operating company leases the land at fair market rent. So if there's 3 kids involved, that own the land, and one of those owns the operating company, and he pays fair market rent, or she pays fair market rent to the land entity. Well, if he or she owns a third of that, they're going to get some of that money back anyway. But they're renting it at fair market value, and so the other siblings can look at that and say, hey, I'm doing as good as I could do if I leased it to my neighbor or somebody else. So I get some passive income every year, and I don't have to go out there and work for it. It just comes in, and so that can be very good. The challenge comes in is where, all right, we've got this $15 million ranch, and the 2 off-ranch kids, let's sell it, because if we sell it for 15, I get 5 million, and you each get 5 million. I'd rather have my money and run with it and go do something else, pay the taxes, and what's left over I get to keep, kind of thing. And I see that more frequently when there's no rental income coming in. But if rental income's coming in, and land historically appreciates in value, and because, all right, well, down the road maybe we will sell it, but at least at the time being, I'm getting fair market rent for that land, and it's money I wouldn't have, and it's college money for my kids or grandkids, or paying off my mortgage on my home, or buying me a new vehicle, or whatever it is, but it's money that I wouldn't normally have. And so separating those two things out, the operating company from the land company, is just huge. And I think everybody should do that, at least on paper, but doing it legally so that the legal entities can be a real benefit in succession planning those kinds of conversations.
Allan, I appreciate your generosity with your time today. We're going to have a show notes page for today at workingcows.net/139. There will be a link to the Simon Sinek book, the Crucial Conversations book, and then also a recent Profit Tips article where Dallas Mount shared your ladder illustration. I'll link to all that at workingcows.net/139. If you've got just a couple of more minutes, I would like to ask you a couple of fun lightning round questions.
Okay, let me recommend one other book. It's called Extreme Ownership.
Okay.
The subtitle is How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. It's by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. I don't know if I said their names right or not, but that book, they take something that happened to the Navy SEAL team and they tell the story, and then they explain the principle behind it, and then they apply it to business. And it is very, very applicable to a ranching business as it is any other business. But I really, really enjoy that book. I've given away several copies of it and to clients and whatnot over the years. But Extreme Ownership.
Sounds real good. You got
fire away.
All right. Okay. So one person, Jay Clark, wants to know, can you argue both sides of raising heifers versus buying replacements with equal enthusiasm?
Yes.
Perfect. This is how I like my lightning round answers to be. So then John Coleman Locke says Cessna 180 or 182?
It depends.
He says, is it true that real men fly airplanes with little wheels behind the big ones?
It's been said. I have heard that said that that's true.
Well, thank you for your time today, Allan. Anything you want to share as far as how people can keep up with where you're going to be, or how they can get a hold of you to bring you in on some consulting, or is COVID-19 just got all that stuff too much up in the air?
No, my phone number is 520-253-0040. That's my cell phone, which is my office phone, and it's the only phone I have. And if people call, if I'm in a meeting or on a phone or out of pocket on a ranch visit or someplace where I don't have cell phone service, if they don't leave a message, I don't return the call. Mm-hmm. But if they're interested in having a conversation, no obligation conversation, I would be happy to talk to somebody, and usually about 30 minutes, and just go into kind of a discovery mode of what they see their issues and problems are, and what getting those resolved would look like for them, and that kind of thing. And then we can have a conversation about what it would look like if I got involved with them, and where that might go. But I do offer some free phone, whatever you want to call it, orientation, consultation right off the bat. If somebody is interested and they want to fill me out and I fill them out, and quite frankly, it's not always a good fit. Sometimes I'm not right, sometimes they're not right, and it needs to be a good fit if we're going to work together and try to get things to happen for them. So call me. That's the best way. Just give me a call, and I'll be happy to set up a time and we can have a conversation and then see where it goes. And again, absolutely no commitment or no obligation on their part to make the call. They're not buying into anything. It's just, let's have a conversation and see where it leads.
Sounds real good. Allan, thanks for your time today.
You're very welcome.
Looking forward to talking to the guys from Performance Beef Analytics next week. We're going to talk to them about the product and how it's serving a lot of different needs in the marketplace and giving people an opportunity to improve their profitability and their quality of life. So kind of what we're all about here on the Working Cows podcast. Look forward to that on episode 140 for the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.